Welcome to toy-polloi.
Hello and welcome to another video from toy-polloi. Now today we're going to take a look at fixing a vintage talking Action Man Commander. In front of me I have two different versions of the Action Man Commander. On the left we have the Blue Pants Eagle Eyes version, which is a version I have shown you a few times how to fix. And this is a fairly straightforward one. The normal problems with this is it either runs too fast or too slow, and this one is a perfect example of one running too fast. If I pull the cord, you can hear that it runs way too fast. So check out some of my previous videos to see how to fix that one, because that's a particularly easy one to do. Now the one on the right is an earlier issue talking Action Man. This has a completely different mechanism inside. The Blue Pants version uses a tiny little record, and the earlier issue has more of a sort of tape drive. It's a longer piece of tape, still with a little needle that runs along it like a record player, but it's actually a tape that is pulled rather than a record that spins. So it's not one I've actually fixed before, and I've never really seen one in person. And this one, if I give it a good shake, you can hear it rattles quite a lot, so it sounds like there's some actual broken parts inside it. So today we're going to try and restore this one. It's not something I've done before, so it's going to be a learning sort of exercise for me as well. But let's get straight on and see what we can do. Now, as well as having a broken mechanism, this figure is fairly dirty. You can see he's got quite a lot of dirt and grime over his face, a little bit of flock missing there, but it's mainly just dirty. So as well as fixing the mechanism, we're going to take the whole thing apart and give it a good clean. Missing his hands, but I've actually bought some replacement hands so we can drop those on. The cord for the talking mechanism has obviously snapped and gone inside, so I bought a replacement dog tag as well to go on there. So we have everything we need to get started on him. But the first thing we're going to do is take him apart, and like the other talking figures, he is actually screwed together, which makes it quite easy to get into. There are just two screws at the top of this, none on the bottom, so we're just going to get a Phillips screwdriver and we'll undo those two screws. Take those screws out and put them in a little pot so we don't lose them. And now we should be able to get into the back of this figure. So I'm just going to pull down on this and pull up, and everything comes off. So there's the back section. The two arms come off. That's good because it means that we can wash them. The head comes off, and here is the internal mechanism. As you can see, it's pretty much come apart. There's lots of bits just floating around. So there's a couple of bits of metal there I can see, another piece of plastic. This is the main mechanism. As you can see, it's got a little diaphragm speaker. That's the same as the Blue Pants era version. There's another piece of metal. And then this is the mechanism itself, and again with a loose gear. So something has seriously gone wrong with this. As you can see, it's fairly battered, but there's the little bit of tape that is where the sound is recorded. So I'm going to have to do a bit of research and see if we can actually put this back together. I would have thought we could, but it's pretty beaten up at the moment, but we'll work on that in a bit. So this mechanism, as at first glance, looks very complicated, but actually with a little bit of sort of tinkering, I've managed to work out the way it should go back together. This is actually a flywheel with these two bits of sort of metal weights, and the weights have just come off of this flywheel, so we just have to clip those on like so, and you can see that they clip on fairly easily, so that when this spins around they should sort of open out a bit and counteract the pull of the spring. And this looks like it should go straight through the middle there, which it does. So that's where that piece comes from. Then obviously this end is not held in place now, and I think that is where this piece comes into action. Let me just rearrange some of those. That hasn't clipped on quite properly. And that's where this piece comes into action. You can see that this has actually snapped off the side, so it should hold the end of that flywheel in place, and I'm guessing be glued onto there. So that's where that piece comes from. And then this other missing piece of plastic, I can see that there's glue along each side of it, and then if we look at the top of this, there's also glue on each side of this. I think what's happened is there's some little pegs there as well that would have held this in place. I think that should actually be glued like that on the back section, and that holds the whole of that sort of top part of the mechanism together. So when we put this back together finally, all of those will sort of have to be glued in place. Now the reason this mechanism doesn't work, let me just take out all of these pieces, is that you can't actually pull this piece of string, and it looks like there's a knot in there which is holding you from pulling it through that hole. I'm not quite sure why that knot is there, whether that's to stop you being able to pull the string too far, or whether it's just a child has tied that in, because it's all sort of knotted up. So I'm just going to have to cut this piece of string and we'll see what happens. You can see the string goes around this pulley and there's this spring-loaded belt. So it may be that it all sort of pulls back together, but we'll just have to wait and see, and we can then replace this piece of string and see if we can get the mechanism working. So first thing to do is just to cut this string, and we'll just see what happens. Let's give it a go. Whee! So there you go, it's all sprung back and everything has come undone. I can even see the tape has come unhooked. So we've got to work out what we can do now to get this all back together. But that was the spring-loaded part of the mechanism. So I should be able to roll this back. Oh yeah. Okay, we've got a little bit more work to do, so I'm going to take some more of this apart and see what I can do. This is actually turning into quite a fiddly fix. I've managed to loosen the string, and as you can see there's actually quite a lot of the string in place, so it was held under tension. Now the tape needs to be firmly held on this first spool, and there's a tiny little piece of metal that holds it in place. I can actually just ping that out with a screwdriver, and you can see that is what holds the actual drive tape in place. But obviously now the drive tape has come out and has come unwound from this first spool. It should also go under this needle, which is sort of held by a spring on the underside there. So we're going to have to thread this tape back through under the needle and then pull it out the other side and attach it back onto this spool so that the whole mechanism works again. This is a fairly fiddly fix and not something I was expecting to have to do. So you can see that needs to thread under the needle, come through here, and then we can attach it back onto this spool once it's under the needle. So I will try to do this on camera the first go. So here's the piece of tape. Just going to grab that with a pair of tweezers. I'm going to push that under the needle mechanism and start to thread that through. And then I need to get it through this side as well. So I'm going to thread my tweezers through and see if I can guide that back out the other side, just like so. There you go. And now we can slot that into the first spool. I'll get the little piece of metal that held it in place, and that just looks like it pushes in and is just a pressure fit. I might have to get a pair of pliers or something to do that, but it should just push into that little hole. Not the easiest thing to do. There we go. So that's now the tape wound up, and I think what happens is when you pull this string, yeah, there you go, that's it working. So it pulls the tape through and then it rolls back. So it might be that I actually need to roll this round a few times to get more of the tape on, but that certainly looks like the mechanism is starting to work again now. After a bit more tinkering, I did wind the string on fully, but I think this bit of string is way too short. If I pull the string as far as it can, it doesn't get to the end of the tape, and the end of the tape is a very key part of this. If I roll this tape on just by hand, which takes a few seconds, you can see right at the far end of the tape are some grooves, which are the sort of the randomizer bit that tells the needle where to fall and where to start, because there are, you know, a number of different speech tracks that it can pick up on, and so if you don't wind the tape on fully to the end, it's got no way of knowing where to start. So I'm just going to wind this right on. It's quite hard work because the spring is pretty intense, but you can see here if I get to this end of the tape, there are some quite sort of firm lines drawn in the tape, so firm grooves I should say, and that's what the needle falls into. So with the bit of string that I've got, when I pull that out fully, it only pulls the tape about halfway, so I think the string needs to be about twice as long. So I'm going to replace that. Just let this run back in. You can see the string gets quite knotted up. So at the moment the string is about 30 centimeters long, so I'm going to make it at least double that. I've bought some string. Now this is fairly fine thread. I bought some 1mm nylon thread, and I've also got some 0.5mm nylon thread, so I'm going to replace it and wind it on, and we'll just see what happens. To replace the cord, it's actually held in with a tiny little piece of plastic. In one of the holes on this spool, you can see the cord goes through a little hole on that side and is threaded out this side. So I'm just going to take out this old piece of thread, and then I've cut myself a longer piece of, this is the 5mm nylon thread, because I think this is going to be the thinnest that we need. It also means that we can get quite a lot of the thread on the spool. So I'm just going to tie a knot. I'm just going to tie 2 knots to make it nice and sort of large, it doesn't go through the hole. And then we've got to thread the other end into this spool. So one end I can see there's a tiny hole. Just check it's the right one. It is. This is going to be a very fiddly job, so I've got to thread this through there. I'm hoping I can see it. Oh yeah, you can just about see it there. Get my tweezers in and grab that like so. I can pull this thread through, and as I say, this is then held in with this piece of plastic, so you sort of have to push everything in. Again, I'm going to use the tweezers, and that sort of pushes in next to it and stops it from being able to escape through the hole at the other side. It's quite a clever design, but obviously this was easier to do when the whole mechanism wasn't sort of joined together like this. There you go, push that in. So now that string is firmly held in place, and I can just trim off the end of that. So I'm now going to wind everything up, and we'll see if this works. So it's now all threaded back on, and I've got the tape in the right position. So if I pull this string, I'm hoping that it will pull the tape far enough now that we'll get right to the end. So let's just pull this fully to the end, and you can see it does just about get to the end. You can actually see the deeper grooves there. Still could do with being a little bit longer. It's hard to believe that you need so much string for this, so I might do that one more time, just get a few more rounds on, and we'll know exactly how long this bit of string needs to be. But it is incredibly long. It's about 60 centimeters already, and I still not got to the end of the tape, so I'm going to do that one more time, and hopefully we'll get the right length. Okay, I think I've got it this time. Now when I pull the string, it goes all the way to the end of the tape, which is exactly what we wanted. So I think I can give this a try. I've got the front part of the Action Man here. All we want to hear is just a sound at the moment. I don't really care if it's the wrong speed or anything. I just want to hear the mechanism working. So put this on the little diaphragm speaker, pull this forward and let go. Nope, didn't work, and now the string's gone through. Oh, this is going to be a right little pain. Try that one more time. So I put this all together. Let's give it one go. Not really hearing anything much. Okay, time for a little bit more of an exploration and see what happens. I was expecting to hear at least a sound there. The mechanism is working though, so that's something. It's just not making any sound at all. It could be that this is just running too fast, so I'm actually going to put the flywheel mechanism back in place. I've put it back together so you can see the two bits of metal sit on those little pegs. We can drop that back inside here. And then I'm going to glue on this plate just sort of temporarily with a bit of super glue, just so that everything holds in place. And we'll see if that makes a difference, because in theory this should all work. Everything is running as it should do. It's just not making the right sort of sound. So maybe it's just running too fast and everything's sort of jumping off the little track on the tape. Hard to tell. So let's just glue it back together and we'll try it again. I have to say, I think I've come to about my sort of limit on this. I don't know what I can do. The spring is so strong, it's now actually snapped. You can see one end of it is supposed to be attached here, and it's snapped. And it's pulling so fast that the tape goes through at really quite a rate. And you can actually see that it started melting the plastic where the nylon is sort of pulling really sort of quite fast through the mechanism. So it's really stumped me. This is much more complicated than I'd imagined, or just much more vicious than I imagined. So I'm going to have a little think and see if there's anything I can do to actually save this mechanism. It was in a pretty sorry state to start with, and I've really done my best so far, but it's just everything I do doesn't seem to be working, or things seem to be working against me. So I'm going to have a little think. After a load more tinkering on this, I think I've just decided to give up on it, because everything I do seems to break something else. I think this mechanism has just been broken and damaged too many times for me to repair it. So for now, I'm going to hold off on finishing this project. I'll get the rest of the figure all up and working and make him look really nice, but the internal mechanism I'm just going to leave like this. And this is sometimes what happens when I do restoration projects. Things don't quite work out how I expect them to. And so for this, I'm just going to wait until I find another talking commander figure and with a sort of broken mechanism, and I will take that one out of that and make the best of both of them and get it all working then. I've certainly learned a lot from taking this apart. I know exactly how the mechanism should work, and I was able to get it all sort of back together, but it just seems to be that everything I do now just makes this break again in some different area, which is a real shame. So I'm going to get the two figures all finished off and we'll take a look at them. So for now, this is where this project is going to end. I've done all the other restoration work on these figures, which I've not shown on camera because I've really covered this quite a few times in other videos. And I've got the more modern Eagle Eyes Blue Pants version of the Talking Commando working. So you can hear
What's the password?
he talks and he says it at the correct speed. And as you can see on the older Action Man, I've replaced his hands, I've repainted his face, I've given him a good clean, I've done a bit of flock repair on his hair, and I've put him in the correct uniform. So for now, these two do look really good and they can go on display here. And at some point in the future, I hope to find another early talking commander figure that I can take apart and take bits out of to repair the mechanism in this one, because I know they can be fixed. So I wouldn't really class this as a failure, it's just a pause in a restoration. And sometimes when I'm doing restorations, I do wait quite a long time between starting a project and finishing it. I just don't often show that in the videos that I produce. So today you're seeing a sort of a midway stage in a restoration. The bulk of him is working, but I've had a few setbacks, so I will come back to him in the future. I need to say a big thank you to Justin Waite, who very kindly sent me a box of bits recently, and in it was this talking commander figure, and also to Heath Wolford, who very kindly picked up this Action Man that he found in a charity shop. He paid a grand total of 29p for it, so even though it's not working, it's well worth the 29p that he paid for it. So thanks again to those guys for sending these in, as projects have been really good fun and I do like a challenge, and I will be coming back to this one in the future. And thanks for watching.
Thanks for watching toy-polloi. Subscribe for more great videos. You can also follow toy-polloi on Twitter, Facebook, and Instagram.